Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is a little collection of frozen foods that I got put together for this worm feeding today. It's a variety of different soup greens. I think there's some parsley in here, a whole bunch of carrot clearly, even some of this white carrot, parsnip, and whatever else is usually used in a soup. There's a couple corn cobs here. I had an old roll here, or a part of a roll, that I didn't finish. I was holding on to it, but then I just noticed that there's a little bit of mold developing on this thing, so I figured it was time to give it to the worms. I've even got a couple coffee filters over here. Coffee filters we could use to mark where we last fed. That's usually my method for marking where we last fed. The systems that I want to feed are down there on the ground. They're those two trays all the way down low there. A couple of systems in which we've got European night crawlers. There is not an exact number in the two systems because we had a haul out of a nursery, I believe, but we had some sort of a fungus growing, which made me think that it might not be a good idea to put the worms into the system that I saw the fungus in, which was bin number 1, so the addition of worms ended up in bin number 2. These systems are now 92 days of age, and they were fed 7 times till now. That last feeding was 13 days ago, and it wasn't all that much from what I remember. So my guess is that they're probably ready for a feeding. So let's get them up on the bench and get them fed. Oftentimes we're using either leaves or my shredded paper collection as bedding, but today we're going to make use of a whole bunch of these vivid bright orange napkins. It's going to go nicely with the carrots that they're getting today. Let's see how things are doing in here. Bubble wrap's doing pretty good, keeping the moisture down in the system, I hope. Let's see here, we've got a top covering of newspaper, which looks like it's gotten nibbled on quite a bit. We could always replace it and include it as supplementary bedding with the feeding. I don't really have an objection to going big on bedding. It's been sort of a theme in a lot of my systems too, to try to go big. Try to just increase the space for the worms and maybe even promote breeding and mating by doing so. I'm pretty sure this was meant to be one of our feeding zone indicators, a coffee filter. But it too is pretty far gone. I was going to set it aside, put it right over there with the orange napkins so we could just use it as bedding with today's feeding. And we could just grab a nice fresh piece of newspaper to cover up with at the end. So that last feeding in the middle, I believe it was green beans. Maybe a couple corn cobs. I'm not quite sure. I tried to skim through the last video, but I didn't take a whole lot of time doing so. I was just curious if there was anything about that last check-in that was out of the ordinary, and there wasn't from what I remember. So my hope was that today's feeding would be pretty vanilla and straightforward with no surprises. Looks like these leaves that we sprinkled out across the top were pretty heavily worked on as well. A couple of them that are still a little bit dry, maybe the ones that were on the outer perimeter didn't get too worked, but everything else looks like it did. When I was making the latest batch of my prepared bedding earlier, I was starting to run low, so I figured I better take some time and make some more. I used up all the leaves that I've got in here in that mix, so I don't even have any leaves right now with which we could replenish the top sprinkling of, dry leaves on top. Just a little disc, a little piece of corn cob. In the very beginning, I started taking these corn cobs and, chopping them into little rings, little discs. I guess they start as discs, and when they nibble the inside of it out, it turns into a ring pretty quickly. But then I figured, what am I taking all this effort for? The worms will eat it up anyway. Definitely helps with speeding along the process by busting it up for them that way, but I'm in no hurry. They can take as much time as they need. I'm just kind of randomly going through here. A lot of times we'll kind of open up the middle, which is where I usually feed, plop in the new feeding, and then start exploring elsewhere. I just figured today I would maybe a little bit more randomly explore the system to see how things are doing in here. This looks like a pretty good batch of bedding we must have laid down beneath the last feeding or one of the most recent feedings. Parts of it even looks like it's hardly been utilized. And that's okay. We can give them a whole lot more if we want to. I think we've got space in here to do that. These castings out along the top are really nice. Everything's got a nice cool and damp feel to it. Luckily nothing feels too dry. I'm sure that if we were using some sort of a breathable covering, like a piece of paper or something, it wouldn't be quite so nice. But that bubble wrap does a really nice job keeping the moisture down within the system. So these corn cobs would be 13 days progress, and they take time. Corn cobs always take time. And you can help it along if you chop it up or whatever, but I haven't really been bothering. And then it usually is the center of it that gets nibbled out first. And then they work down the remainder of it as well, but the middle part is a little bit softer and probably nice and tasty. So they always manage to work that down pretty quick in the very beginning. Alright, so we've already found 3 kind of half cobs of corn and a couple little chunks, little discs. But that last feeding they got was almost 2 weeks now, and it was the sort of stuff that you probably wouldn't expect to see. I mean, the corn cobs, yes. Definitely expect to see leftovers of that. But the beans, the green beans that they got, not surprising that we're not seeing any leftovers of that. And I think that's what they got. And I'm starting to wonder if I'm mixing this system up with another system. This feels to me like, and it has like the scent of something sweet, maybe, oh, citrus. I think there was even a couple chunks of lemon that I had to get rid of. So one of them ended up in here and the other one would have ended up in the other system. So that's actually lemon, what remains of it. I think this system got half of a lemon and the other system got half of a lemon. So they've done a pretty good job working that stuff down. Some of these leaf stems are huge. That's all right. This system's not even 100 days old. I think we're going to have plenty of time to see that stuff gradually break down. So I've stacked up stuff pretty high here on this side. And here's all that nice top covering leafy matter that we collected in the very beginning. A lot of times we'll take all that stuff that's just been sitting out on the top surface and getting somewhat neglected and use that as the foundation for the feeding. We could do that again today. So let's just take a look at how the things over on this edge look. I guess when we've had a chance to explore, we'll stack this stuff all up and make a nice big crevice in the middle that we can drop today's feeding into. The material on this side feels a lot more damp. It's interesting. Considering that we were feeding down the middle, it's unusual that the moisture would be out here on this edge. Sometimes I wonder why that is. Okay. Everything's got a really nice loose feel to it. Everything's nice and granular. Nothing's clumping together. Nothing feels muddy. Nothing feels dry. Nothing feels uncomfortable or like it could be uncomfortable. So hopefully I'm assessing it correctly, and hopefully the worms are pretty cozy in here. Every now and then you could see one trying to climb the wall, probably not appreciating my rather rough tilling around of their environment and exploring. But I do want to make a pretty good sized pit, because I've got, you know, not only recycled top covering newspaper to drop in here, but also a couple of those really large decorative napkins. So I think we'll put it all in here kind of in little layers. This was that old feeding zone indicator. We'll replace it with a nice new one. But down here onto this first layer of bedding material, why don't we start stacking in their foods? I guess we'll begin with a couple of these corn cobs, because they're just easy to pick off the top in this half of the roll. That seems like a good way to start. But then we should probably also return all these leftovers we encountered along the way. It's like 3 pretty good sized corn cobs and a few smaller chunks of corn cob. Here's another small chunk of corn cob. There's a few of them here and there. Might hit a few more along the way as we start loading everything in here. And now that we've put in some food, we can bring in one of the napkins. This one, for whatever reason, was really kind of torn up into little pieces. So let's see about kind of opening it up a little bit and spreading it out. My hope is that by putting this stuff in here dry, it's not going to suck up too much of the surrounding moisture out of the material that's here in the system. We could always dampen it, and you know, why don't we? Because I've got my little bottle of the Mosquito Dunks BTI solution here, which I've been wanting to reinstitute as a standard addition to all my systems. So we'll kind of use that as a reason to try to counteract the dryness of this napkin over here. That seemed easy enough. And now I've still got a pretty good quantity of frozen stuff here. I'm wondering if I can just bust this whole package right in half and come up with a pretty fair split for both systems. That should work, right? Set this other one aside. Then we've got ourselves a pretty good even distribution of the stuff we're giving them. So it's parsley, carrot. The white carrot, I think, is parsnips. This stuff was all in my freezer. And I don't think it'll take long for it to thaw out. So let's see. I think this was some of that recycled leafy material that we scraped off the top. That stuff will do really nice down in the feeding area, I believe. Sprinkle some of that in. And I've still got another napkin over here that I'd like to include in here. And that, I think, will bring us to the point where we've got pretty much a fair split of food for each system. I've got worm chow too, so you know what we'll do is we'll dampen this napkin too. We'll sprinkle in some worm chow, and then I think we'll be done. I really don't see any insects in here, and I'd like to keep it that way. That's the reason this Mosquito Dunks is going in here, as a sort of a preventative measure, I suppose. In the other systems that I've got some signs of insect activity, I am trying to, you know, knock the flying insects out there and eliminate them. But here it's more probably about a proactive sort of avoidance, not even letting them get a foothold in here. So I like the moisture levels. Here's another leftover chunk of corn cob. We'll get that down there too. I don't think we brought the level of the whole system up a great deal, but it probably did come up a little bit with those couple pretty good sized napkins, with a pretty good sized feeding. There's another chunk of corn cob. I don't know why, I just feel like those chunks of food should be submerged a little bit. I would have liked to have sprinkled some leafy material across the top of this system at the end as sort of a natural top covering, but like I said, I ran out and it's pouring rain outside. There's no way I'm going to go outside to replenish my leaf supply today. But the one thing we can do is we can bring in one of these coffee filters to indicate to ourselves where we last fed. Can you give it a little bit of moisture? And then we could take take a top covering piece of newspaper here for them too. And try to remove the address. Sometimes it feels like the printed address on these things is just staring the camera in the face, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. It just seems like I'd prefer to keep my location in the world an unknown. No need to be that open. We'll have people popping in. Hey, let me check out your wormery. How you doing, dude? Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see very similar setup when we get to bin number 2. I assume we will. Usually I kind of explore and go kind of slow on the first bin. Hopefully we can get the other one wrapped up a little bit more quickly. So let's get that one over here and we'll continue. Here we go. All right, so the yeah, there's not much difference, right? We've got similar coverings here. I'm assuming we're going to find similar moisture levels, similar amounts of leftovers. Here it looks like we have a very similarly heavily worn both top covering newspaper and feeding zone indicator. So we'll just follow suit with what we established in the first system, and we'll just utilize all that as bedding to go hand in hand with today's feeding. Let's collect up this top surface material and see how the stuff beneath it looks. Lots and lots of nice castings that the wormies are leaving all over the place here. I definitely like it. And I guess we could just sort of go from edge to edge, go across the whole system gradually like we did in the other one. Maybe picking off any leftovers we find along the way, little chunks of corn cob. Maybe we'll find another little stash of bedding down here like we did in the other one. Wouldn't be surprising if we did. It is pretty predictable usually if you're managing worms in a very similar way and you've set them up in the same way and everything like that. And once you've gone through taking care of bin number one, taking care of all the other ones afterwards always seems a little bit more straightforward and fewer surprises. Okay, let's dig in here a little bit. Another corn cob. This was where we found some leftover bedding from last time. It must have just been kind of piled up without enough food or moisture in it to keep the worms interested, so they sort of didn't bother too much with the stuff. That's okay, I'm just sort of blending it in as I go. This is a peach pit. It's going to take a long time, if it even goes anywhere. Usually I just end up pulling those sort of things out. Maybe I've got to be a little bit more patient, just allow them to keep going, and maybe someday we'll actually see what happens to one of those over time. I've just never really been patient enough to allow that to happen. Here's a the stem of a pumpkin. The worms are kind of burrowing into it, making little tunnels through it, hanging out on it. Kind of cool that they're really working that thing too, even though it's probably nothing more than just a chunk of wood, but I guess that's right up their alley. More chunks of corn cob. I guess once we've piled everything up pretty good on this side, we can move our leftovers over. We can explore what's happening on the other side. I'm really not sure if it's noticeable or if it is, but this is the one that we estimated to have a couple hundred more worms in it than the other one, because it received the worms from a haul out and no worms were added to the other one on that one occasion. So that couple hundred worms difference, I don't know if it's really going to produce any sort of visible differences or noticeable differences. Offhand, I don't know if I can really gauge this bin as being possibly more productive than the other. I mean, it's got a lot of castings, that's for sure. They're definitely stacking up quickly. Worms are doing a really nice job. Is this the lemon? Once I bumped into this thing, I could tell it was, because I was trying to get that nice little citrus aroma coming off of it. But they've pretty much wiped it out. There's not a whole lot of it left. Let's drop these leftovers on the other side, just so we can explore this other far edge before we plop in today's feeding. See how things look over on this side. I wonder if this side's going to be a little bit more damp as we found in the other system. Alright, let's see if we can keep everything in a nice stack over here and not have it slide down into this hole. Well, I guess we're going to fill this hole in anyway as we explore this edge, but then we're just going to move everything right back to where we found it. Open up a nice big crevice for their feeding today. I don't think it's more moist, but it's definitely got a good number of worms hanging out in it. Kind of cool. I keep bumping into so many of these little discs, these little corn chunks, corn cob bits. They're everywhere. And they'll break it all down over time. And over time, I guess it's the end of the summer now, so I guess maybe a couple weeks we're into autumn. So the corn availability will gradually dwindle down to nothing, and then it'll be no corn till next summer. Unless it's canned corn or something like that. Or imported corn that costs just way too much, so I usually don't buy it. So for me, corn is definitely like a summer thing. Okay. Here again, I'm attempting to make a nice large opening for us to start stacking in today's feeding. So let's see, we've had a pretty good run there on the first one by bringing in the leftover bedding bits that we found from previous top coverings and feeding zone indicators. And then into that we stacked a whole bunch of this leftover. It did seem to me like this system may have had a little bit more leftover, and that just might be because I may have portioned the food into this system a little bit more heavily, with the assumption that the couple extra 100 worms in here would require just a little bit more food. Well, who knows, it could just be an optical illusion. And let's see, I feel a couple more little chunks of corn cob here. But let's start bringing in some of this nice fresh bedding that we're giving them. Some nice vivid chunks of napkin. I wonder if these are just going to be brown the next time we come in here, or if they're still going to be orange. Or if there's going to be any of them left at all. I guess we'll have to see. Doesn't seem to take a whole lot of moisture to dampen them thoroughly. But I'd rather have that moisture coming in from the outside so that the object or material goes in damp versus putting it in dry and having it draw all kinds of moisture out of the surrounding materials. So here's the moldy bread and the fresh corn cobs. And I think it was over here that we started introducing some of this nice top covering leafy material, which is no longer a top covering. It's just going to go right in as supplementary food and bedding with the feeding. And let's see, we're almost there. Almost time to stack in all that carrots and parsley and other stuff mixed in there too. I think there was a few peppers. Alright, I don't know what this stuff was. These napkins must have been used to clean up some sort of a mess. These napkins are always coming from my mom's house. I always feel bad just watching them get collected up and head towards the kitchen as if they're just going to get tossed into the trash, so I try to intercept them to make sure that I give them a fair chance at getting broken down versus just sending them off to the landfill. I don't know, this portion even seems a little bit greater than what the other bin got. It is possible that they're getting more. This is I'm not sure if this is one of the peppers out of my garden. Didn't look too good. It actually had a hole in the bottom of it that I think some creatures might have crawled into, so I just didn't feel like taking my chances getting sloppy seconds after the creatures that burrowed into it, so I just figured I'd make it into worm food as well. Alright, I think we're pretty much done here. All we've got to do is get things covered up with a whole bunch of this really nice material. I don't know. I'm just curious to see what people think. Do you guys think that the material in this bin is coming along more quickly than the other one, or are we pretty much keeping equal pace with each other? I mean, we had that big mound of, you know, undisturbed, almost untouched leftover bedding, shredded paper and stuff over here like we saw in the other one. Over here, I don't think we saw quite as much dampness within the material, but a good amount of worms hanging out. The leftover quantity is pretty comparable. Not too much difference there either. And, you know, the 200 or so difference in worm count could be way off too. Those are all just estimates. all estimates that I tried to put together with input from the viewers, so it's not just my guesses or estimates, it's kind of an average of everyone's estimates. I think I forgot to put in the worm chow. Well, you know what? We'll sort of break from the consistency factor here, and we'll just sprinkle it across the top here, and I'll just douse it, make sure it's nice and damp. Kind of makes me think that it's not going to last this way. If you give them a bunch of worm chow nice and moist right there on the surface, they're probably going to gobble it up 1, 2, 3. I've been trying really hard to get my worm chow to get broken down really thoroughly, but this could be a little chunk of cashew or Brazil nut or one of those mixed nuts that I included in my worm chow that just managed to escape getting pulverized. Interesting. I thought I had done a really good job breaking up the worm chow this time, but I'm starting to see little scraps of bits and pieces of it here and there. Maybe I could have done a better job grinding it into a more fine consistency. So this piece seems like it's maybe just a little bit too long, so we'll just fold in the edges so that it fits underneath the bubble wrap. And now we've got ourselves a nice new feeding zone indicator, a nice new top covering piece of newspaper, and a nice fresh feeding number 8 for them. And I think we're good to go here. Oh, come on. There we go. That's it for feeding our 2 European nightcrawler worm bins, feeding number 8 on day 92. And I don't know, maybe we can go another 2 weeks before we feed. Maybe we can come back sooner. Kind of depends on my schedule these days. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.